Male second in command, Shuangjie. At the moment of seeing Shi Yi, Shen Dang realized that those who rely on time to let go of their worries cannot bear to see each other again over a period of 7 years. Shang Ying resigned with his own efforts, making the Shang family the most famous high gate in Qingcheng. Everyone envies Shi Yi for his good vision, for climbing up to become a good person and having no worries for the rest of his life. Only Shi Yi knew that the boy who had traveled all over Qingcheng to buy anti-season peaches for her had long disappeared. On the spring day of Qingcheng, Shi Yi walked out of the supermarket biting on ice cream and saw Shang Ying and the young lady of the Qiao family embracing on the street, unable to part ways. She watched quietly, and the next second she threw the engagement ring and ice cream into the trash can. A few months later, the rumor of the marriage between Princess Shi of the Shi family and Mr. Shen, the new nobleman of Qingcheng, went viral. Shang Ying stood firmly against the door of the Shi family, his voice trembling as he said, "How many months have it been?" Shi Yi looked indifferent and said, "A few months is enough for me to have an allergy to peaches." When Shi Yi was taking notes, Shen Dang was already a regular visitor to her family. The young man, dressed in whitewashed clothes, took the money from the butler's hand and left with a straight and thin back. Not just the difference between clouds and mud. Later, at the age of 19, Shen Dang knelt down in the snow, and the little princess walked by with an umbrella. Her brows and eyes were filled with disgust, "Just a poor kid who reached out to ask for money from my house." Over the years, the once impoverished youth became a rising star in business. Without any retaliation, he even hesitated to give her an extra look. Until later, the man who had always remained indifferent turned red in his eyes when he got drunk, and he clasped her wrist in a low voice, saying, Sure, what's going on now? Do I deserve you now?" When the geese return, the moon fills the western tower, campus in the early stage, urban in the later stage, keywords of the novel.春日折欢no pop-ups,春日折欢TXT complete collection download,春日折欢latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Don't worry, Shen Dang. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Don't worry, Shen Dang. The spring snow in Qingcheng never stops, and the wind blows on the window with snow, just like the sound of a stuffy animal. The snow foam splashed from the French window becomes a water mist, which creates a sense of dampness in the dim room. Shi Yi lay sideways on the bed, with a dim phone screen in front of him, with only a simple line of words on it. Shang Ying said, "You can cancel the engagement and have a face-to-face conversation." Shi Yi stared at these words for a while, put his phone aside, and turned on the crystal table lamp by the bedside. Her mind is filled with images of today's entanglement between Shang Ying and Xiao Wenning. One is her fiancé. One is an old friend who was driven out of Qingcheng by her every means. And she stood at the convenience store entrance across the street, watching Xiao Wenning, dressed in bright clothes, tightly holding on to Shang Ying, crying so much that I couldn't help but pity her. Behind them is the magnificent and towering building of the Shang family. What kind of person should business resign from? Time is so precious that it is measured in minutes and seconds. Even a man whom she would inform in advance when she meets him on weekdays would leave everyone behind and coax a beautiful woman with a pear blossom and rain during work hours. Shi Yi pinched the ice cream in his hand, his palm feeling particularly cold. Shang Ying did not push Xiao Wenning away, and even frowned, saying comforting words. Shi Yi always thought that this was his privilege. But in fact, he has been getting busier and hotter in recent years, ignoring her more and more. She took a photo of the two and sent it to Shang Ying. The next moment, she threw the ice cream in her hand into the trash can. When Shang Ying's phone call came in, she sat in the car and before he could speak, she simply said, "Shang Ying, let's cancel our engagement." Afterwards, it was also neat to hang up. Memories came to an abrupt end, and Shi Yi got up from bed. The heavy snow was about to stop, and she wore a thick white down jacket. She lowered her head all the way and walked down the antique carved staircase handrails, like a thief, walking out of the house. The villa of the Shi family is built in the suburbs, which is rarely visited by people. Shi Yi dared not disturb others and walked along the snowy road, 1 foot deep and 1 foot shallow, until he reached a far bus stop. He finally touched a few coins in his pocket and waited patiently for the 40-minute bus ride. When Shang Ying saw Shi Yi, the girl stood at the door covered in snow, wearing woolen slippers, soft cotton pajamas, and a white down jacket. In the early morning, the temperature outside was unreasonably low, and her delicate little face turned red from the cold. Shang Ying sandwiched the cigarette between his lips and fingers, slowly lowering his hand. The hand placed on the doorknob also instinctively tightened. He was only wearing a black shirt, and his coldness gradually began to seep in. The heating behind me is full, and the ice in front of me is 10,000 feet cold. He opened his mouth to say something, but for a moment he was speechless. And Shi Yi raised his eyes, his brown pupils staring at him emotionlessly. She was a beautiful embryo from a young age and gained some fame for her beauty in high school. And Shang Ying looked at her eyes in a trance. Shi Yi really has a pair of very beautiful eyes, amber-like pure and clean light, and her eyes flow when looking at people, which is heart-stirring. He has never seen anything more touching in his life. It's already in person. Shi Yi spoke first in a stiff and distant tone. Shang Ying's narrow eyebrows and eyes slightly narrowed, his fingers holding cigarettes paused, and he lowered his gaze and leaned over to make way for her. "Come in and talk, it's cool outside," he said. "The room is well heated, and the air is filled with the faint and soothing aroma of plant essential oils. Shi Yi is not here for the first time. The vine on the windowsill on the first floor was brought by her. She sat on the sofa with her back straight." Shang Ying poured a cup of warm water and placed it in front of Shi Yi. His sleeves were half rolled, revealing his sturdy and beautiful arms. Shi Yi lifted his head and looked at Shang Ying's face. His refined and elegant appearance, with every gesture, was characterized by a long period of aloofness and indifference. He is truly a calm and impeccable person. Perhaps sensing her gaze, Shang Ying paused with his hand holding the teacup. Shi Yi averted his gaze and looked down. Leng Buting saw the engagement ring on his middle finger. She realized later that it was already the 25-year-old Shang Ying who had resigned. "I asked my assistant to bring me the cold medicine." The tone of voice is rare and gentle, considerate. He lowered his posture and showed goodwill. Shi Yi couldn't make a mistake and looked at him with complex eyes. After a while, he chuckled lightly and said, "Shang Ying resigned. How do you plan to bring up the matter of getting married?" Shang Ying frowned and stared at Shi Yi in a deep voice. "Shi Yi, you know that Xiao Wenning and I have nothing. After all these years, besides you, who else have I taken to heart?" Shi Yi tugged at the corner of her lips, barely showing a hint of laughter. She spoke slowly, with a hint of sarcasm. "Is it right to act on the spot?" Shang Ying gritted his teeth and remained silent with a tight jaw. Shi Yi ignored his unsightly expression and smiled sweetly. "Mr. Shang is able to control himself freely. I admire him." Shang Ying's breath became heavier, and his fingers instinctively clasped Shi Yi's wrist. He hasn't had this feeling of being unable to grasp and panicking for a long time, and in an instant, he can hardly breathe. He was searching for words in his mind, about to speak up and explain when he heard Shi Yi say, "Shang Ying, let's call it a day. Thoroughly rational, with continuous pains. Have you figured it out?" "I can't be clearer," Shi Yi said and withdrew his hand. Another long silence. "Shi Yi, have you ever thought about it for your parents? Once the marriage between the Shi family and the merchant is cancelled, the Shi family's situation will only be embarrassing." Shang Ying slowly stood up, his eyes becoming darker and his tone becoming heavier. "You can't just live for yourself. Shi Yi, you are still like a child, either black or white, with no sand in your eyes." Shi Yi remained silent, just looking at the remaining warmth in the cup on the table. But yuan is still yuan, and this water will eventually become cold. My own parents, I can take care of them myself. Shi Yi threw a ring into the cup, splashing small splashes of water. Shang Ying looked at the ring at the bottom of the cup, which reflected a dazzling light under the light. His pupils suddenly contracted, and his face turned pale with iron. He was angered by the deliberate actions, and the apologies that had already rushed to his lips were swallowed back. He smiled and looked gentle, essentially a condescending gaze. Shi Yi heard Shang Ying say, I won't see Qiao winning again. Shi Yi, can't we both take a step back? Shi Yi also smiled, got up, looked up at him, no way. Shang Ying probably smiled, with a strong anger in his eyes. He didn't know who he was saying it to, and his words resounded loudly, Shi Yi, you must not regret it. Shi Yi didn't answer, just pushed the door and left without looking askance. At the moment the door was pushed open, wind and snow poured in. Shi Yi stepped out without hesitation. At the moment the door closed, Shi Yi heard the sound of the water cup shattering on the ground. Shi Yi doesn't remember when Shang Ying was last so angry, this time he must have been very angry. The garden outside has been covered with snow again, covering up her footprints when she came. Shi Yi knew that Shang Ying was watching her, so she walked resolutely without stopping for a second. Shang Ying planted many crabapples outside the door, which bloomed freely even in snowy weather, with a blush color. Shi Yi walked along the flower trees, the number of streetlights gradually increased, and the road became bright. It was probably an illusion that she heard someone calling her name. She instinctively turned her head and saw a familiar yet unfamiliar face. 25-year-old Shen Dang stood under the street lamp, the grand light falling on him. He looked at himself, still as proud as he was in his youth. His slightly long hair added a touch of softness to his face. His skin color was stronger than snow, his eyebrows and eyes were deep, and his lips were red and teeth were white, which was more enchanting than before. He was wearing a black shirt and the same colored assault suit, white sneakers, and seemed to have remained unchanged in his youthful appearance. He walked step by step towards Shi Yi. Shi Yi looked at his delicate and thick face, as well as the faint darkness between his eyebrows and eyes, and said helplessly, Don't worry, Shen Dang. His gaze fell on her restless and anxious pupils, and he spoke in a cold voice, Shi, you're feeling unwell. Shi Yi inserted his fingertips into his palm, and his voice became even more erratic. So you're back, are you here to retaliate against me? Shen Dang. His chin was gently lifted, and Shen Dang squinted his eyes as he looked at her beautiful face, his smile mixed with mockery. Do you think I came all this way back to seek revenge on you? Shi Yi has nothing to say. And Shen Dang's face gradually approached her. The dark emotion in his eyes melted like ice and snow. Shi Yi looked carefully and only saw a gentle expression in his eyes. Shen Dang said, Sure, should we get married? A name that has not been mentioned for many years and will never be announced to the mouth. When it is mentioned again, it is familiar as if it has been mentioned thousands of times. Before Shi Yi could say anything, Shen Dang had already let go and walked back towards the direction of the street lamp. Turning back again, he had one hand in his pocket and the other carrying a plastic bag. He threw the plastic bag at Shi Yi's feet and said lazily and coldly, Put it on. Shi Yi was stunned for a moment, then bent down to take a look. Inside were a pair of red Northeast large floral cotton shoes. Shi Yi blinked, his eyes a bit wet. Shen Dang looked at her motionless expression and thought she was being vulgar. He frowned and said, It's too late. This is the only one nearby. You can just wear it. The wind passed through the crabapple tree, and the snow seemed to get even bigger. Amidst the endless snow, Shen Dang squatted down and replaced Shi Yi with wet slippers. No one knew, he heard a deep sigh in his heart. He thought she was so embarrassed that he would be happy. Even if there was no pleasure, there should be a little gloating. But at this moment, he had no pleasure at all, just thinking over and over again that she had been in poor health before and couldn't catch a cold. Shi Yi sat on a plastic bag holding her knees, tears streaming down one by one. Shen Dang looked at her and for a while, reached out to pinch her face. Shi Yi, did you hear what I just said clearly? Shi Yi cried so much that his eyes and nose were red. Wei looked at him with grievances and remained silent. In the next moment, tears were gradually wiped away by someone. In the spring of February in Qingcheng, Shen Dang, with his harmless and lustrous face, said to Shi Yi in an almost seductive tone, I just said, we get married, and you set the date. Having never seen Shi Yi in these 6 years, Shen Dang understood a truth. His fierce and rebellious soul will only bow down willingly in front of giving wishes. At the moment of seeing Shi Yi, Shen Dang understood another truth. It turns out that those who rely on time to let go cannot bear to see each other again. Tonight, when the sun shines on the silver, I still fear that meeting will be in my dream. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. New Classmates. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. New Classmates. 7 years ago, when we grow old together, old age makes me resentful. She has a shore, she has a pan. At the banquet of the General Horn, the words and laughter were sweet and steady, and the oath was firm and resolute, without thinking about the opposite. Class 11, Grade 2, Qingcheng No. 1 High School, with a faint cicada chirping and a hint of summer warmth, came in from outside the window. 17-year-old Shi Yi stood on the podium, hands behind his back, with a childish face and a serious expression, carrying newly learned ancient texts. Xiao Tunan, who teaches Chinese, is the homeroom teacher of Class 11. He has a long teaching experience, gray-white hair, presbyopia glasses, and a kind smile. He wears a dull and serious Zhongshan suit all year round. He stood by the podium, listening as Shi Yi finished memorizing the entire ancient text. He nodded in satisfaction and said, forget it this time, don't be late next time. Shi Yi quickly nodded and twisted his fingers behind him. With innocent brown eyes, he smiled at Xiao Tunan and said, Teacher Xiao, can I go down now? Xiao Tunan's expression was affectionate, sure. Shi Yi sat in the third row of the classroom, by the window, with curtains bulging in the wind, covering most of the table. Shi Yi was about to sit down, and her desk mate Xiao Wenning approached her with a book upright, whispering, just 3 days after school started, you were late twice. If it weren't for you being the class monitor, old Xiao would definitely have cleaned you up. I won't do it next time. Shi Yi took out a pen from the drawer and placed it on the Chinese textbook, pursing her lips with a sly smile. I promise. Xiao Wenning's face was originally tense, but now she couldn't help but laugh. So you tell me, where did you go? Shi Yi picked up a pen and copied the notes on the blackboard, chuckled and said, secret. At the moment when the class bell rang, Xiao Tunan reached out and patted the table, saying, Classmates, today we have a new transfer student in our class who is the champion of this year's National Olympic Games. I hope everyone can get along well with the new student in the future. A commotion erupted, and everyone's eyes were filled with novelty. Champion. Is he the one who snatched the championship of a class of business graduates? Wang doesn't see Wang, there's a good show to watch. I don't know what it looks like either. Song Siyu, are you crazy about flowers? Who are you talking about being a flower addict? Shi Yi frowned, his subordinates holding the textbook became more conscious, and then began to organize as if nothing had happened. Class monitor, Xiao Tunan walked toward Shi Yi and knocked on the table, saying, You come with me to welcome the new classmates. Shi Yi subconsciously wants to refuse. But Xiao Tunan didn't give her a chance. You are the monitor of Class 11, so you should take good care of your new classmates, right? Shi Yi thinks it's right. Qingcheng No. 1 High School has been established for 100 years and is the best private high school in Qingcheng. The children who study here are mostly from parents who are engaged in business and politics, and come from affluent families. When Shi Yi was taking the high school entrance exam, he was more than 10 points behind the admission score. Father Shirmachuan, as the chairman of Qingcheng No. 1 Middle School, waved his pen and directly allowed his daughter to enter the school gate as a dance talent student. This behavior is not an exception in Qingcheng No. 1 Middle School, so there are also a group of playboys with poor grades in the school. Fortunately, Shi Yi was also quite impressive, and after a year, he became the top student in the regular class. Although there is still a big gap compared to the top class, Shirmachuan firmly believes that in time, his precious daughter will definitely become even better. Shi Yi followed Xiao Tunan's footsteps and walked outside. During class time, there were not many people on the road, and only the sound of Lang Lang's books could be heard coming from the teaching building. The ground was glaring under the sunlight and Shi Yi lowered his head, playing with his shadow for some self-entertainment. She was absent-minded, and suddenly heard Xiao Tunan walking in front of her say, "The new classmate's personality is not very sociable. You should take more care of him in the future." This time, he scored the highest score in history in the National Mathematical Olympiad competition, and the school attaché's great importance to him. Shi Yi thought of the unusual and serious appearance of Shang Ying's resignation in the past few days. She slowed down her pace, reached out to play with the sticky hair on her neck, and her ponytail swept a beautiful curve in the air. "How much is it, so important?" "Full marks." Shi Yi's heart thumped for a moment, then he pursed his lips and said, "He's so amazing. Why come to an ordinary class?" "You child. This is the school's decision." Xiao Tunan smiled kindly, paused, and then reminded, "Anyway, don't forget to take care of it." "How to take care of him?" Shi Yi stepped on her own shadow, responding with a lackluster expression. "Teacher Xiao, he's not a child. He's not sociable. What can I do?" Xiao Tunan felt that Shi Yi's words were problematic and turned around to look at her in disapproval. The two of them spoke these words all the way and unknowingly walked to the school gate. The sunlight shines on the metal texture of the school gate, hot as if melting. The ancient tree at the entrance of the school was transplanted from the garden of Shi Yi's family, towering and lush green, as if flowing, making people unable to move their eyes. Under the towering tree, a thin young man closed his eyes and leaned against the thick trunk, with an old blue suitcase at his feet. He wrapped his hands around his chest, heard footsteps, and slowly turned his head. The appearance of young people can even be called beautiful, with deep eyebrows and eyes like stars, slightly upward curved eyes, rosy lips, and cold white skin. He dyed a head of red hair, which did not appear mainstream, but rather very demonic. That year, popular girl novels featured comics featuring beautiful young girls on their covers. He seems to have come out of a manga. At the moment Shi Yi saw him, she was first surprised by his exquisite appearance, and then felt that he was born very familiar to her. "It's like seeing it many times. Are you Shen Dang?" Xiao Tunan took a step forward and looked at Shen Dang with a look of emotion and joy. Then, he pointed to Shi Yi, who was daydreaming beside him. "I am the homeroom teacher of class 21 in high school, and this is our class monitor, Shi Yi. From now on, she will be responsible for helping you familiarize yourself with the class. If you have anything you don't understand, you can ask her." Shen Dang's gaze slowly fell on Shi Yi, his red hair shining with sunlight, becoming even more dazzling red. He had a faint smile and called out her name while chewing on the pronunciation, "Shi Yi." The gentle breeze caressed the dull air and lifted the hem of Shi Yi's school uniform. She reached out her hand and politely said, "Hello, Shen Dang." Shen Dang watched as she remained silent, her smile, which was already better than nothing, disappeared, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Xiao Tunan originally intended to accompany Shi Yi and Shen Dang back to the classroom, but saw grade teacher Zhang Yuwei standing at the school gate and greeting himself, "Teacher Xiao, the math teaching and research group is having a meeting. Come over here for a moment." So only the two remained silent and deadlocked. After all, Shi Yi is the class monitor. After thinking about it, he still took the initiative to show his goodwill and said, "Do you want to live on campus?" I'll take you to the accommodation department. Shen Dang felt that Shi Yi's appearance was quite hypocritical, and he sneered with disdain. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Grade 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Grade 1 Shi Yi could hear the malice in his tone, but she couldn't hold back. Do you have any objections to me? Her voice is sweet and sticky. Saying such words has no killing power at all. Shen Dang did indeed look completely indifferent. Who dares? Class monitor. He finished speaking, tugging at the suitcase at his feet and turned to leave. Shi Yi didn't forget Xiao Tunan's advice and blocked his way. Where are you going? Is it related to you? He bent slightly and looked at the girl who was only up to his shoulder. Shi, who do you think you are? The mood in his eyes was gloomy, so dark that he couldn't see the light of the sky. Shi Yi looked at it and suddenly felt a sense of fear. But Shen Dang looked at her stiff and motionless appearance, stood up straight, and walked briskly. Shi Yi has never seen such an impolite person before. When Shi Yi arrived home, Shi Chuanma and Lan Qing were both present. The huge villa, apart from the servants and butlers, was only composed of 3 of them, making it particularly spacious. Lan Qing saw the stains on Shi Yi's skirt at a glance and curiously said, "How did this happen? I'm afraid I'll be late for class and run too fast, and I'll scratch myself at the school gate." Shi Yi pursed her lips and walked over to Lan Qing's side, holding her hand and sitting down. "Mom, it hurts so much, you hug me quickly." As soon as Shen Dang left, Shi Yi rushed back to class. Perhaps it was because he was very angry, and the person who had always been obedient and well-behaved walked very fast on the road, rubbing his skirt against the cleaning car that was about to leave school. Shi Chuanma, who was sitting on the sofa reading a newspaper, heard Shi Yi's words and frowned. He put down the newspaper and looked at her seriously. "Why are you so careless?" But Lan Qing knew that Shi Yi was acting coquettish, and a smile appeared on her well-maintained and gentle face. She raised her voice in a serious tone and said, "Let me see what's wrong with my precious daughter. Oh my, she really hurts me so much." The mother and daughter laughed and frolicked about, and Lan Qing touched Shi Yi, who was curled up in her arms and coquettishly said in a soft voice, "Yi, what do you think? The matter of studying abroad with the child who should resign?" "Mom, I haven't figured it out yet. Isn't it just my sophomore year now? We can consider next year." Shi Yi blinked and looked at Lan Qing with a smile. "Don't worry, I have a plan in mind." The butler on the side walked up and respectfully said, "Sir and madam, we can have dinner now." Lan Qing grabbed Shi Yi's hand and said, "I should be tired after studying all day. Eat more tonight. After a sunny day, there are always many stars in the night sky. The stars are shining brightly, and the night is getting dark. SK bar, private rooms on the first floor." The deafening music, a group of young boys gathered to play cards and fight alcohol, the smell of tobacco and alcohol filled the air, and hormones were rioting. Wei Xingliang stood in front of the microphone and sang Xiao Yashuan's, The Most Familiar Stranger, a lyrical old song that had a ghostly crying and wolf howling effect. "It's just that my love is so strong and deep. So I woke up from my dream, ran aground, fell silent, waved my hand, but couldn't come back to my senses." Singing passionately, the door of the private room was opened from the outside. Unlike the bizarre attire of most people inside, Shen Dang was wearing a black assault suit and long pants, with a beautiful face of a demon, extremely clean. Even that red hair looks terrible. He walked in expressionless and closed the door with his feet. Wei Xingliang only then noticed Shen Dang's arrival and said humbly, holding the microphone, "Come on, let's welcome our top student Shen Gu. It's rare. Our Yueying Vocational High School can even win a National Olympic Championship." A group of people ignited at the slightest moment, and the commotion sounded like they were about to flip the ceiling. Shen Dang didn't react much and sat in the position where Wei Xingliang was sitting, with his eyebrows and eyes lowered. His slender fingers picked up the bottled beer in front of him and pushed it open with his thumb, causing white foam to surge up. The people present all followed Shen Dang, knowing how beautiful his face was and how fierce the fight was. The entire Yueying Vocational High School, and even all the vocational high schools in Qingcheng, cannot find anyone with better skills than Shen Dang. Who would have thought that not only were they skilled, but they also had a good brain? He said he was going to participate in the Math Olympiad competition, but he really came back with a championship and was directly admitted to Qingcheng No. 1 High School without exception. How can one not admire it? Wei Xingliang reluctantly put down the microphone and walked down from the stage. He patted Huang Mao sitting next to Shen Dang and said, "Go over, Shen Gu doesn't like people sitting next to him." Huang Mao felt aggrieved and took a puff of smoke, saying, "I didn't sit next to each other either. Young master, I want to sit here, please step aside." Oh, Wei Xingliang watched as Shen Dang finished a bottle of beer in one breath and realized something was wrong. He swallowed his saliva and cautiously probed, "We've all gone to Qingcheng No. 1 Middle School. Why are you still unhappy?" Only he knew that half a year ago, Shen Dang was trying to get into Qingcheng No. 1 High School. He and Shen Dang searched through all the recruitment rules of Qingcheng No. 1 High School over the years and found that the only way to break the rules for admission was to win first prize in national competitions. However, Shen Dang was even more impressive than Wei Xingliang had imagined, not only winning the first prize, but also breaking the record directly. "Aren't you?" Wei Xingliang looked nervously at Shen Dang. "What you told me before, isn't it true?" Shen Dang turned his face to look at him, looking indifferent. Wei Xingliang suddenly became anxious. "People like us are not worthy of that kind of girl. What kind of person are we?" Shen Dang's words were cold, and he paused with a dark gaze. "What kind of girl is that?" Wei Xingliang choked for a moment and rubbed his nose with an unnatural expression, feeling a bit embarrassed. "I didn't mean that," he said, "I'm not interested in her." "Ah." Wei Xingliang was shocked. He leaned closer to Shen Dang and lowered his voice, "So why did you ask me to go find her photo before?" Someone took over Wei Xingliang's previous position and started singing. Everyone knows that Shen Dang's personality doesn't like to receive too much attention, and he tacitly doesn't look this way. And Shen Dang casually threw the empty beer bottle onto the table, leaning against the sofa, with his hands behind his head, his posture lazy and indifferent, and his black pupils deep. After a while, he suddenly laughed, laughing too recklessly, revealing a shallow pear vortex. He said, "I just want to see what kind of young lady the Shi family can teach." Wei Xingliang didn't understand, what does that mean? Shen Dang remained silent, and the door was once again pushed open from outside. Shen Dang just raised his eyes slightly and looked over. The person at the door is undoubtedly the first in grade at Qingcheng No. 1 Middle School, and Shang Ying has resigned. The boy's white shirt was meticulously tied to the top, with a black background and white stripes on the outside. He has a handsome and elegant appearance, gentle and noble, which appears to have been infused into a refined and noble upbringing. He looks too lofty, making people feel that swearing in front of him is a sin. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Specialties and Hobbies. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Specialties and Hobbies. Shang Ying walked straight to Shen Dang. Amidst the hustle and bustle of darkness, he stared straight into Shen Dang's dimly emotional pupils and paused word by word, "Come out. How did you speak?" Wei Xingliang chuckled and raised his eyebrows. "Do you think this is your backyard? Did Shen call it out as soon as you said?" After Wei Xingliang finished speaking, he threw the beer in his hand onto the ground with a loud bang, and the liquid flowed out of the bottle, wetting the ground under Shang Ying's feet, leaving a mess. Shang Ying took a step back with a disdainful expression, his gaze still fixed on Shen Dang. "Are you leaving or not? If not, I'll call someone." As soon as Wei Xingliang said these words, the boys sitting next to him stood up. "Old Wei, hasn't this kid ever been beaten before?" I happen to have itchy hands today, let's practice with him, Huang Mao said with a fierce smile, eager to try. Seeing the situation becoming increasingly anxious, Shen Dang, who had remained unmoved, lifted his eyelids, stood up, and walked out. Wei Xingliang was taken aback. And Shang Ying quickly followed suit, with a cold and elegant expression on his face. The smell in the hallway of the bar is not pleasant, with a mixture of smoke, alcohol, and vomit, making people nauseous. Shang Ying has never been to such a place before. In the eyes of the world, it is only the scum of society that comes. And Shang Ying is the star of tomorrow who excels in both character and education, and he is only suitable to stand on the highly anticipated award podium. What do you mean by the photo you sent me? Shang Ying took out his phone and the screen was full of light, displaying his childhood memories. She stood in the remote countryside, timidly gripping the hem of a woman with a weathered appearance. What does it mean? Shen Dang sneered, took out a cigarette from the pocket compartment, and casually lit it. Shang Ying's veins bulging at the corner of his forehead, he quickly took a step forward and grabbed Shen Dang's collar. Don't pretend to be foolish. Shen Dang continued to bite the smoke, and a crimson flame ignited between the two. He held the cigarette between his two fingers and let go of his hand, looking at Shang Ying with a smile on his face, speaking slowly. Can't you really tell? I'm threatening you. Shang Ying has a chilly feeling of being possessed by evil spirits. He tightened Shen Dang's collar even more, his eyes wishing he could eat him directly. But the photo in Shen Dang's hand still made Shang Ying choose to make concessions. What do you want? 1 million. Are you extorting me? Shang Ying couldn't believe it. You can choose not to give it, but... Shen Dang took a puff of smoke, his thick and gorgeous appearance was so bad to the bone, but this photo will soon be sent to everyone's phone at Qingcheng No. 1 Middle School. How dare you? Give it a try. Shang Ying gradually loosened Shen Dang's collar, and he closed his eyes heavily before compromising, I promise you. While Shi Yi was having breakfast, Shang Ying resigned and came to the Shi family. Wearing a simple school uniform on him also looks very nice. Jilan Yushu stands tall and upright. As soon as Lan Qing saw Shang Ying come in, she smiled and asked, Yingzi, do you want to have breakfast? I have eaten it at home, Shang Ying said politely, thank you, auntie. Shi Yi tugged at his sleeve, and the latter lowered his head to look at her. Why haven't you come to my house these days? Shi Yi swallowed the salad in her mouth and asked, are you hiding what you're doing from me? What can I do without telling you? Shang Ying smiled at her serious appearance, paused, and explained, Shang can't handle things these days. I went to the group to help my dad for a few days, so I didn't come to your house much. I thought you were unhappy if you didn't win in the math Olympiad competition. Shi Yi let go and took a bite of the bread. Winning or not is a small matter, Shang Ying smiled and shook his head. And Shi Chuanma curiously asked Shang Ying, how many days did you go to the Shang family to help? Yingzi, what happened? It's not a big deal, Shang Ying watched as Shi Yi bit the bread one by one like a little squirrel on the ground floor. It was only after a while that he added, Uncle, don't worry, everything is fine. Shi Yi took the bus to school where he resigned from business. Two people sit in the back row, with the partition installed, creating a relatively enclosed space. Shang Ying took the milk that Shi Yi had finished drinking and pretended to be casual, saying, has a new classmate arrived in your class? Do you know? Shi Yi looked at Shang Ying with wide eyes. Thinking of Shen Dang's impolite appearance yesterday, she couldn't help but frown. A new classmate has arrived, it's quite impolite. Shang Ying lowered his eyes and touched Shi Yi's hair, whispering softly, then don't pay attention to him, stay away from him. Shi Yi looked at Shang Ying's gentle and elegant face, her heart beating a bit fast. She thought for a moment and cautiously replied, I'll try my best, but as the class monitor, I can't completely ignore him. Shang Ying didn't say anything, just smiled gently. Shi Yi had seen Shang Ying resign in front of others, cold and serious, with a stern demeanor. He can only be so gentle towards himself. The girl's vanity was suddenly satisfied. As he was about to arrive at school, Shang Ying stuffed a peach-flavored gummy into Shi Yi's backpack and warned, "The monthly exam is coming in a few days, and tomorrow happens to be the weekend. I'll help you make up for it." Shi Yi took out the peach gummy from his backpack, placed it in his palm, and sweetly put it back. "Okay. Early reading is English." The English class representative, Song Weiwei, went to the student union meeting today and was led by Shi Yi. When the morning reading was over, she tidied up the textbooks on the podium and the classroom door was pushed open from outside. Shen Dang stood at the door, her beautiful appearance unable to conceal her wild and difficult-to-tame demeanor. Her red hair flaunted, making her complexion even fairer. He chewed his gum and noticed Shi Yi looking at him. His chewing stopped and he curled his lips and chuckled lightly, "Hello class monitor." Shi Yi stood on the podium, gripping the textbook tightly, his face flushed with excitement. And the classmates also looked at Shen Dang curiously. Shi Yi silently told herself in her heart that you are the class monitor and you need to unite with your classmates. With this in mind, she took a deep breath and smiled, saying, "This is our new classmate, Shen Dang. He won first place in this year's National Math Olympiad competition. Shen Dang is good-looking and has a halo, and the girls in the class applaud very hard." Shi Yi walked down from the podium holding the textbook and suggested to Shen Dang, who looked indifferent, "Shen, could you introduce yourself?" Shen Dang raised his eyebrows and slowly leaned against the door frame, saying, "Class monitor, I'm so old that I haven't introduced myself before. Just talk about your previous learning experiences, strengths and hobbies, just talk about them casually." Shi Yi finished speaking and turned his head to his seat to sit down. As soon as she sat down, Xiao Wenning excitedly said in her ear, "Shi Yi, this Shen Dang looks pretty good." Shi Yi didn't think it looked good. And Shen Dang walked lazily towards the podium. He picked up the chalk from the podium, broke it in half, and turned around to write down his name on the blackboard, dancing like dragons and phoenixes. The two characters Shen Dang almost filled the entire blackboard. "Hello classmates, my name is Shen Dang. I came from the neighboring Yueying Vocational College entrance examination." In just one sentence, success made the atmosphere awkward and deadly. Shen Dang continued expressionlessly, "I have been living in the countryside since childhood, specializing in growing vegetables and having a passion for fighting. I don't like to make friends and don't want to get to know everyone more. I hope in the future, we can not interfere with each other, that's all." This time, the classroom was so quiet that no one spoke. Shi Yi regretted asking Shen Dang to introduce himself. She lowered her head and looked at the questions in her homework book. After reading for a long time, she didn't even notice a few words and just wanted to pretend that she didn't exist. Unfortunately, Shen Dang walked to her desk. "Classmate," Shen Dang knocked on Xiao Wenning's desk. "Change your seat, I'll sit here." "Ah, oh, okay." Xiao Wenning was stunned for a moment before planning to get up. Shi Yi grabbed Xiao Wenning's arm and looked up at Shen Dang. She has a good personality and usually doesn't argue or grab anything. She is obedient like a rabbit, but now she has become a little hedgehog standing up on guard. "Wenning is sitting here well. You can move if you want." "Shi Yi, it's okay," Xiao Wenning whispered, "Shen Dang is a new classmate, let's accommodate him a bit." Shen Dang hasn't laughed since he walked into this classroom to introduce himself. At this moment, he looked at Shi Yi guarding him like a thief, but couldn't help but laugh. "She can still stay," Shen Dang pulled Xiao Wenning aside and walked to Shi Yi's seat. He suddenly bent down, propped his hands on the tables on both sides, and looked at the little girl leaning against the back of the chair in fear. Without any sense of guilt, he said, "She won't leave, you come with me." Shi Yi has never seen someone like Shen Dang before, he is really bad. Before the first math class, Shen Dang sat beside Shi Yi as he wished. After he sat down, he started sleeping on the table, and there was no intention of getting up until the math teacher Wang Song walked in. Shi Yi pushed him several times with his elbow and whispered, "Class is over. Wake up." There was no response. Wang Song helped his glasses on the bridge of his nose and looked at Shen Dang lying motionless. He said meaningfully, "Some students think they just won a prize. Don't forget that this is Qingcheng No. 1 middle school, not a vocational high school. It's better not to think too high of yourself." By insinuating, he is talking about Shen Dang. Shi Yi frowned and looked at Shen Dang, who was unmoved, then pushed him. There is still no response. During a math class it was obvious that Wang Song was burning with anger. When the class bell rang, he threw away the lesson plan with a bang and walked away without looking back. Shi Yi looked at the red-haired boy beside him, thought for a moment, and finally threw the peach gummy in his backpack into his desk. "Shen Dang, you don't have to listen to Teacher Wang. Coming over from the vocational college entrance examination is not a big deal, but it shows that you are quite impressive." Her voice was soft and a bit sweet. "And you are also very good at growing vegetables, but it's not good for fighting." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Autumn Tour. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Autumn Tour. Until she finished speaking, Shen Dang still lay on the table without any reaction. Shi Yi felt somewhat embarrassed and picked up the black pen on the table, burying her head in doing her homework. Shen Dang left early before school was over. His books were all collected from the academic affairs office at noon, still brand new, just piled up on the table. In the last self-study class, the sunset was magnificent, and everything on the table was stained with a layer of gold as it penetrated through the window. Shi Yi frowned as she looked at the empty seat beside her. She has never seen someone as independent as Shen Dang. Classmates. Our class will have an autumn outing next week, just like Gaoyi, with a cost of 500 yuan. Everyone will hand it over to the life committee. The chubby Wang Yiluan said excitedly as he patted the door. This is actually a benefit arranged by the school for students, and 500 yuan is not even enough to cover the cost. Isn't there no need for class? Song Weiwei sat in front of Shi Yi. She had just arrived and hadn't seen Shen Dang yet. Therefore, she turned around and asked Shi Yi, will Shen Dang participate? Song Weiwei, did you not hear what Shen Dang said today? He said he hoped we all wouldn't interfere with him, said Song Siyu sourly across the corridor. Song Weiwei was absent-minded. Upon hearing this, he looked at Shi Yi with a puzzled expression on his face and said, Shi Yi, why does he have to sit with you? Shi Yi didn't know why, but shook her head sincerely. Song Weiwei didn't mind Shi Yi's silence and enthusiastically asked many more questions. Shi Yi answered without a word, and finally stayed up until the afternoon after school. Shang Ying's car was parked in the most prominent spot at the school gate, and Shi Yi could see it from afar. He bounced over and excitedly opened the car door, saying, Shang Ying. The latter was originally reading materials when he heard a voice with a smile and looked up, saying, I've told my aunt that you can come to my house directly on the weekend. Shi Yi is not the first time she has been to Shang Ying's home. She has been accompanied by Shang Ying since she has a memory. Therefore, upon hearing Shang Ying say so, he nodded and got into the car. The car was driving on the highway, and Shang Ying finished his work. He placed the folder on his lap and casually pointed it with his hand, looking at Shi Yi. His voice was gentle. Your class is going to Pudu Temple on the outskirts of Qingcheng for this autumn trip. I have already arranged for someone to take care of the 5-star hotel next to it. Shi Yi was surprised and said, Did you choose the place for this autumn outing? Do you like it? Shang Ying also smiled, with deep wrinkles in his peach blossom eyes. Shi Yi was in poor health when she was young, and Lan Qing always took her to Pudu Temple to burn incense. Shi Yi likes the aroma of incense in temples, and the smoky and fiery atmosphere doesn't make him feel uncomfortable. Instead, there is a serene scent of sandalwood that fills the air, making him feel at ease. Shi Yi said he liked it and paused before asking, "Are you going too?" Shang Ying looked at her indulgently and said, "Our class is also going." Shi Yi suddenly felt very happy. She wants to ask Shang Ying, "Did you choose this place for me?" But after thinking about it, she decided not to ask. Shang Ying has an introverted and rigorous personality, and even the furnishings at home are upright, simple and elegant. Shi Yi bent over and changed his shoes at the entrance, skillfully finding his white slippers. "When will uncle and auntie come back?" Shi Yi changed into her shoes and asked curiously. Almost, Shang Ying hesitated for a moment and asked her, "Are you hungry or not? Do you want to eat something first? Can I eat chocolate?" Shi Yi looked at him eagerly. Shang Ying sighed and turned to the study upstairs. When he came down, he had an extra box of chocolates in his hand. He looked at Shi Yi's happy expression and couldn't bear to ruin her mood. He just reminded him, "I bought it secretly, you should eat a few fewer at a time." Update time, 6 p.m. every day, end of this chapter. Chapter 6. Intends to pursue her. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 intends to pursue her. He looked at Shi Yi's happy expression and reminded, "I secretly bought it. You should eat a few fewer at a time." Shi Yi agreed verbally, but his hand holding the chocolate was not idle, and he casually took several more. So when the meal was ordered, Shang Junming looked at Shi Yi and didn't move his chopsticks much. He asked with concern, "Shi, is the food at uncle's house not to his taste?" "No," Shi Yi quickly shook his head and explained, "I had afternoon tea and I'm not hungry now." Shang Junming felt relieved and nodded, turning Shi Yi into a bowl of soup. He said softly, "You can tell uncle anything unhappy. Shi is a girl and wants to grow up happily." "Thank you, uncle. You should also be happy every day," said Shi Yi with a sweet mouth. She obediently picked up the bowl with both hands and took a few sips of soup. And Shang Junming looked at Shang Ying and said in a deep voice, "Take good care of Shi on the weekend, you know." "I know. In autumn, the climate in Qingcheng is variable, and it drizzles at night." Thunder swept across the sky, accompanied by a loud noise, instantly illuminating the entire room with exceptional brightness. The room where Shi Yi lived was at the end of the aisle, alone and unusually quiet, so all the movements became particularly clear. Shi Yi was very timid when she remembered things. She was startled by the thunder, and the cat turned on the bedside light. Afterwards, she shrank into the blanket. Outside the window, the sound of thunder was still intermittent. A thin layer of sweat oozed from Shi Yi's back, and tiny hairs stood up with a chill. Her eyes were tightly closed, her teeth clenched tightly. Until the side of the bed sank slightly, Shang Ying's warm voice came from above her head. Shang Ying said, "I'm not afraid, I'll be with you." All the restlessness and anxiety suddenly dissipated. Shi Yi pulled open the blanket, lifted his head, and saw the young man's face decorated to an incredible level of tenderness under the dim light. With a smile on his lips, he touched the sweat on Shi Yi's forehead and said, "Next time you're afraid of thunder, don't endure it alone. You can go find Aunt Lan Qing at home. With me, I'll come find you." Those vague fragments immersed in childhood seemed to have signs of recovery in an instant. Lan Qing and Shi Chuanma were both busy with their careers when they were young. They loved themselves very much, but they couldn't put all their thoughts on themselves. Shi Yi seemed to have seen countless nights again, dark and thunderous, with Shang Ying lying by his bed, taking care of his timid and crying little sister. But he is only 1 year older than himself. How can we forget it? They are important people in each other's growing years. The weekend tutoring went smoothly, and Shang Ying helped himself by checking and filling in the missing knowledge points. Shi Yi realized that he had made great progress. Monday is the customary flag-raising ceremony. On stage, a boy is passionately giving a speech under the national flag. Shi Yi didn't have the heart to listen, and vaguely heard words like, Golden Autumn Festival, youth is strong, the country is strong, civilized and courteous, and so on. She held the speech manuscript, her palms sweating profusely, and nervously lowered her head while carrying it on her back. It's their class's turn to give a speech under the national flag next Monday. Shi Yi is very stressful. Her mind was swollen and she forced herself to carry it. Halfway back, she suddenly felt a curious gaze behind her. Shi Yi instinctively turned his head and saw Shen Dang standing behind him. He was wearing a black assault suit, with red hair. Among the group of boys who wore school uniforms and had their hair cut short, his appearance was at the level of 2 points down. His eyes had a beautiful curve, and at this moment he seemed to smile rather than smile, which was very bewitching. These deep and profound eyes are an important source of the delicate and rich feeling that his entire face gives. At this moment, the sunlight shone on his face, and Shi Yi noticed that his eyebrows, half covered by bangs, were very sharp. "What are you carrying?" Shen Dang raised his eyebrows and glanced at Shi Yi's speech. Seeing the first line of serious text, he chuckled lightly. "Starting from tomorrow, be a happy person, feed horses, chop firewood, and travel around the world." Shen Dang smiled and said, "Shi Yi, you wrote such a foolish speech." Shi Yi. No culture, it's really scary. After the flag-raising ceremony, Shi Yi sat on the playground and continued to memorize his speech for a while before slowly walking back. She secretly brought a Walkman with her when she went out today, and it happened to be in use right now. This year, fast-paced songs have been popular, but Shi Yi is not used to listening and still prefers those slow and lyrical old songs. On the side of the playground is a bulletin board with important school affairs and moments of honor for some outstanding students posted on it. Last year, one person occupied 2 pages for the resignation of the student union, one was the work report of the student union, and the other was the award in the National Math Olympiad competition. This year, the latter has become a photo of Shen Dang. It should have just been changed in the past few days, and the photo is still very new. In the photo, Shen Dang stands on the podium, holding the trophy expressionlessly. In this photo, Shi Yi pronounced the 4 words, spirited and vigorous. Is the young master handsome or not? Cold and steady, Shen Dang's voice reached her ears. He stood next to the bulletin board, lazily leaning against it, with a smile on his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." Shi Yi increased the volume of listening and turned around to leave. "So you've been staring at me for so long." Shen Dang followed her calmly, tugging at the corner of his lips, but his eyes remained calm. Shi Yi pretended not to hear, but walked forward quickly. Shen Dang raised his eyebrows and prepared to grip Shi Yi's wrist. But someone's movements are one step faster than him. Shang Ying resigned in a suit, followed by a group of students from the student union. He pulled Shi Yi away from the situation and looked at Shen Dang with a cold expression, his voice piercing with a chill. "I should have told you very clearly before, don't get close to Shi Yi anymore." Shi Yi took off his earphones and heard this sentence. Across from him, Shen Dang still had a casual expression, but his gaze was fixed on Shi Yi, whose body was mostly hidden behind Shang Ying. And Shen Dang stirred up the flames of war with one sentence. He said, "What if I get close to you? Not only do I get close, but I also plan to pursue her." Shang Ying has always been calm, but at this moment, without saying a word, he strode forward and punched Shen Dang in the face. Shen Dang turned his head and pressed his tongue against the corner of his lips, tasting the bloody smell. He smiled, not at all polite, and directly retaliated. The two of them just got into a fight like this. Everything happened too quickly, and neither Shi nor the group of people in the student union reacted. Shang Ying learned professional fighting and taekwondo with precise movements, while Shen Dang stood out from countless fights and brawls. If he really showed off his ferocity, how could Shang Ying be his opponent? Shang Ying clearly fell behind, with his forehead hitting the ground and his handsome face painted. In an anxious atmosphere, Shi Yi bravely stood in front of Shang Ying. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Apologize for him. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Apologize for him, Shen Dang. What are you doing? Shi Yi said in a trembling voice with red eyes, don't touch him. The veins on the young man's forehead were ferocious, and his beautiful face could not conceal the ferocity and perverseness between his eyebrows and eyes. He looked at Shi Yi with red eyes, his tongue pressed against his upper jaw, and for some reason, he lost interest in continuing. Shang Ying tugged at Shi Yi's arm and nervously said, Shi, please step aside. This is between me and Shen Dang. Shi Yi didn't move, just looked at Shen Dang, who was deadlocked with him. After a while, the latter's fist slowly lowered. His eyes were dim, he turned around and left without saying a word. In the morning light, Shen Dang's back was straight, and his red hair looked dazzling and proud in the sunlight. Rumors began to spread in the school. Shen Dang came in from the opposite vocational college entrance examination. He used to be a thug leader, fighting and not avoiding smoking and drinking. He is a bad student. Nowadays, with an already solitary and cold personality, no one dares to approach. He became even more drowsy in class, lying next to Shi Yi for the whole morning. When it comes to major classes such as physical education, people are nowhere to be seen. Shi Yi really wanted to talk to him about what happened on the playground that day. The reason why she stopped him and Shang Ying was not only because she didn't want Shang Ying to get injured, but also because of another important reason. That's to confront the student union. It's not good for him. He is a transfer student and is unfamiliar with his hometown. And the resignation of merchants from Qingcheng No. 1 middle school is their industry. But Shen Dang clearly had no intention of having a good conversation with her. He sealed himself in a small space, not coming out, and not allowing anyone to enter at all. The day before the autumn outing, the weather in Qingcheng changed rapidly. Shi Yi sat in his seat, watching the gloomy rain outside the window. Classmates, there will be showers today. Remember to ask your family to come to the school gate to pick you up, okay? Xiao Tunan reminded with a loving expression on his face. This shower is not within the weather forecast, it can be considered an accident. The students present were all somewhat surprised, discussing their arrangements after school. Amidst the hustle and bustle, footsteps came from the back door. There was a moment of silence in the class, and then all the poking eyes turned towards the door. It's Shen Dang. His red hair was soaked in rain, and he was flicked back of his head with his hands, revealing a full forehead and sharp eyebrows. This effectively dissolved the softness of his face and added a lot of murderous aura. It's even harder to get close to. He walked expressionlessly in the direction of Shi Yi, sat down with a big bang, and his chair scraped across the ground, piercing his ears. He didn't seem to feel everyone looking at him at all, his slender fingers probing into the drawer, searching for something on his own. Shi Yi looked at the rain on his face and took out a tissue from his pocket. Do you want to wipe it? Shen Dang turned his face to look at her, tugged at the corner of his lips, and said indifferently, Shi Yi, why are you so hypocritical? Shi Yi felt uncomfortable being said this way. She threw the tissue on Shen Dang's table, with a sweet voice and a stiff tone. Do you want it or not? Shen Dang's dark gaze fell on the tissue left by Shi Yi. There is a beautiful floral print on the tissue, with a faint peach aroma. It's really delicate. Shen Dang thought like this, and for some reason, his heart surged with annoyance. He didn't look away, his search became even more irritable. Shi Yi instinctively lowered his head and saw Shen Dang take out a small knife from the drawer. Shi Yi's heartbeat missed a beat, and her eyes suddenly became straight, only then did she notice the scratch on the young man's wrist. Are you injured? Shi Yi suddenly forgot about the disagreement just now. She nervously said, "Shen Dang, let me take you to see the school doctor." Before she could finish speaking, Shen Dang had already stood up and walked out quickly. Shi Yi felt that Shen Dang really disliked himself. But his emotions were not right. After some thought, Shi Yi caught up without thinking. "It's class time, and there's no one on the stairs." Shi Yi leaned against the handrail of the stairs and shouted Shen Dang's name, while the latter slowly stopped and raised his eyebrows and eyes, looking at the delicate face of the young girl like jade. "Her eyes are really beautiful, they are a very special brown color, with water-cut autumn pupils and eyebrows." Qingcheng. Shen Dang remembered his childhood when his father held his hand and wrote on rice paper, "There are beauties in the north." "It's really ridiculous, I must be blind." But Shi Yi saw Shen Dang stop and quickly chased after him. After running for a while, she approached Shen Dang and felt a bit short of breath. She instinctively blurted out, "You walked so fast, I almost couldn't catch my breath." "You're so delicate," Shen Dang said impatiently with a tsk, frowning and looking fierce. "What's up with you looking for me?" "Shen Dang, I saw you take it from the drawer." Shi Yi carefully looked around and gestured with his hand to make a chopping gesture. "Don't do anything foolish. You should study hard now, there's still time." After she finished speaking, her tightly clenched palm spread out and inside was a small band-aid. "I see you're injured," Shi Yi blinked and said sincerely, "if you're not careful, you'll get tetanus. This bandage contains medicinal powder, which is beneficial for wound recovery." Shen Dang took the bandage from the little girl's palm and looked at it casually. He tugged at the corner of his lips, his smile fading. He said, "Shi, what are you doing to me so well?" Speaking these words, even myself was stunned. He pretended not to care at all, but subconsciously he still had some expectations, hoping for a satisfactory answer. "What are you doing so well to me?" "Shi Yi, we are clearly people from two different worlds." The girl's face showed a hint of redness after running, and she blinked her big eyes before slowly saying, "Shen Dang, the incident that day was initiated by Shang Ying. I apologize to you on his behalf." She didn't notice the subtle change in Shen Dang's face and finished speaking on her own, looking obedient and helpless. And Shen Dang's lips gradually straightened, his smile disappeared, and his voice was quiet, very cold and faint. "Why do you have to apologize for Shang Ying? We grew up together since childhood, and he was like family in my heart, me." Shi Yi's back was suddenly pressed against the cold wall, and her shoulders were covered with Shen Dang's tightened fingers. Her words were swallowed up by fear, and she stood stiffly, looking at the young man's face and gradually approaching. Shen Dang's face was as heavy as water, his beautiful features were all dark, and his eyes were filled with dark emotions. They stood on the same staircase. Shen Dang bent down, breathing on Shi Yi's face. His smile was red and his lips were white, but his emotions were intimidating. "Speak up, why don't you continue?" He whispered softly, with a faint hint of a cold smile, easily making the girl who was already scared even more timid in the new year. "I wish everyone success and happiness every day. I also hope that the epidemic will quickly dissipate, so that we can return to the days when we don't need to wear masks." End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Difficult to solve the past. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Difficult to solve the past. Speak up, why don't you continue? He whispered softly, with a faint hint of a cold smile, easily making the girl who was already scared even more timid. "Shen Dang. Shi Yi, put away your overflowing sympathy," he said coldly in her ear. "I don't need you to pity me." An inexplicable accusation. Shi Yi is very aggrieved. "I didn't pity you," her voice mixed with choking, like some frightened little animal. "Shen Dang, you're not pitiful." Shen Dang's red eyes showed signs of fading. He looked at the girl trapped by him without saying a word, and then slowly released his hand. Shi Yi stood straight and motionless. When Shen Dang left, she regained her senses and slowly slid down the wall. Qingcheng City Center, Shang family. Shang Junming and Shang Ying walked out of the office side by side, followed by a group of subordinates in suits and leather shoes. Shang Junming glanced at the injury on Shang Ying's forehead and snorted coldly, "What's the point? Fighting in front of so many people and losing. It's embarrassing. The sound is neither loud nor small, and people behind can also hear it." Shang Ying's face was relatively calm, as if the person being pointed at and scolded by the nose was not him. He lowered his eyes calmly. When he walked into the elevator and only the father and son were left, Shang Ying slowly spoke up and said, "That Shen Dang is not a peaceful person. Father, why did you bring him to school?" Shang Ying resigned. "It wasn't me who brought him to school, it was you who lost that brought him to school." Shang Junming looked disdainfully at the young man's green and white face and said in a deep voice, "If you really have the ability, you can think of a way to make him drop out on your own. I don't care if Shen Dang is in school or not, but he is approaching Shi Yi now. Shang Ying's emotions have obvious ups and downs. I can accompany him whatever he wants, but he cannot harm Shi Yi. You're really a worrier." Shang Junming became increasingly angry and couldn't contain himself. "Does a Shen Dang scare you like this? His father is my defeated subordinate, he's just a little kid. What kind of wind and waves can he make?" Shang Ying choked on Shang Junming's words and stopped speaking for a while. And Shang Junming snorted coldly in his heart. He originally agreed to Shen Dang's admission with one eye open and one eye closed. This is Qingcheng No. 1 Middle School, which is his territory. Shen Dang has no authority or power, and he can jump as high as possible. His son has been very smooth these years, using Shen Dang as a sharpening stone to train his character well is not impossible. The elevator was silent, with only the numbers on the screen jumping up one by one. Unlike Shang Junming's calm and composed demeanor, Shang Ying's face and teeth were tightly closed, and his eyes were filled with an indescribable undercurrent. Sooner or later, he will grasp everything he deserves. Yueying Vocational High School. Wei Xingliang sat in the last row, lying on the table sleeping when suddenly someone kicked the table and chairs. The classroom of a vocational high school is always deserted with few people. Recently, it has been a sunny and crisp autumn day. A group of young people skipped classes and went to play outside the school. Only Wei Xingliang, who had drunk too much yesterday and still felt uncomfortable, stayed to rest. Sleeping trough. Who doesn't have long eyes? Disrupting my sleep. Wei Xingliang cursed angrily before opening his eyes. But all his aura disappeared completely when he opened his eyes. Shen Shengu, Wei Xingliang covered his heart, "How did you come back? Did you get fired?" Shen Dang looked coldly at him talking to himself and spewed out a few words expressionlessly, "I need to talk to you." Wei Xingliang got up from his seat and sat directly on the table. "What's going on?" Wei Xingliang curled his lips and joked with a smile, "I see you're not happy staying at Qingcheng No. 1 Middle School. Why don't you come back as soon as possible? I ask you, what does Shang Ying usually like to do?" Shen Dang ignored Wei Xingliang's nonsense, frowned, and his face showed a hint of impatience. "Didn't we check everything before? That kid lives like a machine. Apart from being attentive to the affairs of the Shang group, the only one who is closer to him usually is the little princess from the Shi family. Didn't the little princess check everything out? Well done, why did you ask again?" When the words Shuangjie came out, Shen Dang lowered his eyebrows and eyes, and pursed his lips until they turned white. Wei Xingliang was puzzled and said, "Is that Shi Yi good? Looking? I'm quite curious. That kind of good student and obedient girl should be quite boring." Shen Dang didn't respond and leaned against the side wall, his slender fingertips pointing at the table. Wei Xingliang understood and took out a cigarette box from his pocket, throwing it to Shen Dang. The young man smokes proficiently, biting the cigarette and holding the fire with one hand. The bright light of the fire makes his eyebrows and eyes deep and unpredictable. Wei Xingliang has always felt that Shen Dang has a deep mind, making it difficult for people to see through or see clearly. Shen Dang, Wei Xingliang took a sip of his cigarette and put down his hand. We've known each other for a long time. There's something I hope you can tell me clearly. You say. Are you going to Qingcheng No. 1 middle school to trouble Shang Ying resigning? Shen Dang turned his face to look at him, glanced lightly, squinted, and said, yes. Shen Dang, why? You used Shi Yi's photo to extort him before, so I wanted to ask, but he has already given you 1 million, isn't that enough? Wei Xingliang scratched his hair and was puzzled. In theory, you shouldn't know each other either. Shen Dang looked at Wei Xingliang's open and closed lips, pinching the almost burned cigarette end with his hand. The corners of his eyes twitched, his thick and beautiful features fluctuating in a fierce color, his face covered in a layer of darkness, and he quickly walked out. Wei Xingliang suddenly had a very bad premonition. He didn't want to, he just followed Shen Dang. The autumn sun outside is just right, everything is floating with a delicate golden hue. Shen Dang's white sneakers made a rustling sound as he stepped on the withered leaves at the school gate. The Yueying Vocational High School campus is quite large, and Wei Xingliang followed Shen Dang all the way. At this moment, he was gasping for breath while holding his knee. He panted heavily and looked up, his eyes suddenly tightening. In Shen Dang's hand, there was clearly an extra bright knife. He doesn't mean to stab the merchant to resign, does he? Wei Xingliang was half scared by his own speculation, and his hair stood on end. He quickly rushed forward, trying to stop it. But Shen Dang had already boarded the nearby motorcycle and rushed out at lightning speed. Wei Xingliang looked at the exhaust of his motorcycle and felt restless. In a moment of desperation, he suddenly remembered someone. Shi Yi. He found Shi Yi's phone number when he and I were investigating her together before. It was precisely at the end of school that Shi Yi, as a duty student, finished everything and went upstairs. The top class, grade 2, class 1, is located in the tallest building. The elevator jumped to 7, and Shi Yi came out of the elevator and walked towards the direction of the business English classroom. Why didn't you leave a message? Isn't it unsightly? Woo woo woo, a cute and humble question about writing about a youthful campus for the first time. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Will you come? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Will you come? She left a notebook with Shang Ying, which she needs to use for her homework on the weekend. After some thought, Shi Yi decided to come and look for it herself. Quickly walking to the door, the phone in my pocket suddenly vibrated. Shi Yi paused and curiously picked up his phone, only to see a strange incoming call. Belonging to Qingcheng. Connect, it's a strange voice. Hello. Hello, hello. Is it Shi? Shi Yi frowned and said, who are you? How do you know my name? Wei Xingliang on the other end was already burning his eyebrows, and he explained to the main point, go find Shen Dang, don't let him wander alone. A never-ending sentence, Shi Yi didn't understand and was about to ask further when he had already walked to the door of class 1. As soon as I looked up, I saw Shen Dang standing inside, with his back facing me, sitting in the seat where Shang Ying was supposed to resign. Shi Yi hung up the phone and walked in, only to see the shiny knife on the table at a glance. And Shen Dang's calm gaze fixed on her, without any ups or downs. Shi Yi hung up the phone and pointed to the knife he had placed beside him. What are you doing with the knife? Shen Dang stood at the entrance of class 2 for a long time, and everyone had left without encountering Shang Ying. He simply came in and sat down for a while, and then saw a photo of Shi Yi from the pen bag of Shang Ying. Wearing a white princess dress and holding a doll, Shi Yi. A white sticky rice ball. Stupid to death. But by a stroke of luck, he put the photo into his pocket when Shi Yi came in. He spoke and said something unrelated. Shi, do you know why you're not the school flower? Shi Yi blushed and said in a muffled voice, because I'm not pretty enough. Shen Dang sneered and said, Shang Ying doesn't allow anyone to see you, let alone anyone coveting you under his nose. Shi Yi, do you understand what I mean? Shi Yi felt that Shen Dang was talking nonsense. The school flower is Shi Yi from class 1, what is its relationship with her? Shen Dang must be talking nonsense. Shi Yi, Shen Dang tilted his head slightly, his eyes lazy and casual, his red hair shining like a bewitching fairy. He said, do you want to go with me to a place? You will know if what I said is true. Shi Yi refused him, but in the spirit of friendship and mutual assistance among classmates, she took the initiative to propose, Shen Dang, I'll treat you to watermelon. Shen Dang wanted to mock Shi Yi, tugged at the corner of his lips, but couldn't help but say something. There is a fruit shop on the campus of Qingcheng No. 1 High School, which offers a wide variety of imported fruits. Shi Yi took down an ordinary-looking watermelon from the shelf, and Shen Dang glanced at the price tag. 100/250 G. The transition from export to domestic sales has resulted in a sudden doubling of one's net worth. Shi Yi held the watermelon and went to pay the bill. Shen Dang saw her white, sheep-fat jade-like profile. He touched the photo in his pocket and a thought suddenly came to his mind. It's quite expensive to keep such a sticky rice ball. The expensive glutinous rice ball held the watermelon that had been paid for and said to Shen Dang, the girl who cut the fruit has finished work. Don't you have a watermelon knife? Help me cut a melon. Shen Dang wants to correct Shi Yi, this is not a watermelon knife. But the little girl looked quite happy, and Shen Dang rarely had a hint of pity for her. He went to the side and washed his knife seriously. Under the national flag, watermelons are cut in half, one person and half. Shi Yi scooped up the sweet and crispy flesh with a spoon and suddenly looked at Shen Dang for a while, saying, Shen Dang, if you go dye your black hair, you will definitely look much better. What do you know? Shen Dang sat arrogantly with his long legs curled up coldly, you know a bookworm reading. Shi Yi was not angry either. She smiled with curved eyes, as bright as the moon. Her voice was very soft, mixed with the sweetness of juice, and didn't make people feel too sweet. Really? Do you think I'm good at reading? You really know how to focus on the key points, Shen Dang chuckled angrily. I said you're a bookworm. But Shi Yi, as if seeing the new world, pointed at the corner of Shen Dang's lips and said, Shen Dang, you have a pear vortex. The boy who was originally mocking Shi Yi suddenly had an unnatural expression on his face. The ears covered by broken hair are visibly red. However, Shi Yi didn't pay much attention. Thinking that everyone would come out, she said, will you come for our class's autumn outing tomorrow? When she spoke, her brown pupils were clear, staring at Shen Dang. Shi Yi's idea is very simple. Shen Dang is not sociable, but he is not a bad person. Autumn outings are a good opportunity, and maybe Shen Dang can still make friends. The latter's gaze began to dodge, and his hand hanging on his side tightened. He jumped down from the national flag stand, took half of the watermelon that had not yet moved, and chuckled softly, naive. Shi Yi whispered, oh, for a moment, but couldn't help but add, come and take a look at Pudu Temple. It's my treat. Pudu Temple is so effective. I've been there since I was young to make wishes and offer incense. If you have any wishes, you can tell the Buddha. Shen Dang, go and take a look. She repeated it over and over again. Shen Dang's face was tense, holding a watermelon in one hand and a pocket in the other. Are you treating me? Shi Yi quickly nodded. Let me check the time. Shi Yi sat on the podium, watching Shen Dang walk away and said happily, then I'll give you a name. Shen Dang. See you tomorrow. The young man turned his back to her, and the smile on his lips deepened, full of depth. See you tomorrow. These 3 words are quite pleasant to the ear. Shi Machuan is not at home at night. According to Lan Qing, there is something going on within the group. Lan Qing didn't know where she got a cross stitch. Shi Yi scooped up half-eaten watermelon and casually glanced at it before asking, "Mom, where did this cross-stitch come from?" Lan Qing raised the cross-stitch and said happily, "The child who should resign today has been brought over by someone. He is really considerate and knows what I like." Shi Yi nodded in agreement, leaned over to take a few glances, and kindly reminded, "Mom, you embroidered the wrong color." Lan Qing exclaimed, "Oh my," and went to the kitchen to look for scissors. Shi Yi scooped up the watermelon again and saw Shang Ying walking in. He was wearing a white coat with a more formal suit style, with a deep and elegant temperament. His eyebrows and eyes were low, and he exuded a calm and emotionless aura around him. Shang Ying's growth was rapid, and Shi Yi had already begun to struggle to understand him. "What are you staring at me for?" Shang Ying sat down beside Shi Yi and naturally touched her hair. "We're going on an autumn outing tomorrow. Are everything ready?" Shi Yi threw the spoon back into the watermelon and said, "We're ready. I have brought you a medicine box with some regular medicines, which have been handed over to the butler. Remember to bring them with you." Shang Ying hesitated for a moment, his gaze fixed on the watermelon in front of Shi Yi, with a hint of darkness in his eyes. He covered it up and said gently, "Watermelon has a cool nature, don't eat too much." Yesterday, the new book opened with scores as low as 5, feeling sad. I hope everyone can easily point out a 5-star and bow deeply. Thank you all. Answer the cute question. The plot of campus and city is about 30% to 70%, and the campus part is almost over before it goes online. The plot of the city will be more diverse. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Stained Black Hair. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Stained black hair. Such gentle advice should not make people feel uncomfortable. Shi Yi nodded and agreed. Shang Ying's smile at the corner of his lips became even more profound. His handsome face and slender eyelashes drooped, casting shadows in his eyes. After a long time, he slowly put down his hand on Shi Yi's hair, squinted lazily and casually, asking, "What other fruits does Shi want to eat recently?" Shi Yi's face blushed inexplicably, and his heart was bulging. She said, "Shang Ying, do you want to buy it for me?" "Buy it." He took the watermelon from the table, scooped out a spoonful, and handed it to Shi Yi's lips. "I'll buy whatever you want to eat." Shi Yi really wants to ask him, Shang Ying resigns. "Will you always be so kind to me?" Words surged to my throat and I swallowed them. People cannot be too greedy. But the boy, who had always been quiet, clenched the spoon in his hand and softly called out her name, Shi Yi. He said, "Wait a few more years for me." Shi Yi's eyes blinked desperately, his lips trembled, and he didn't dare to ask the most real question. She is already very lucky. So she just said, "Shang Ying resigns, will we be family for a lifetime?" The young man, like her when she was a child, had a gentle smile and was not as cold and indifferent as before. He said, Sure, of course we will be family for a lifetime." Shi Yi felt very satisfied. The autumn outing at Qingcheng No. 1 Middle School is an old tradition that has been held for a long time, so all processes are also orderly. The students have not arrived yet, and the ambulance and logistics personnel have arrived at the foot of the Pudu Temple. In case of any special circumstances, they will go up as soon as possible. Inside the school bus, Shi Yi sat near the rear door, leaning against the railing in front of his seat, with a song playing in his earphones. Before the start of the train, the Life Committee member Su Mingyue stood in front, with a small bee pinned to her waist and loudly shouted with a loudspeaker, "I'll take a roll call now. Let's all say it when we arrive." The names are arranged according to the student ID, and Su Mingyue holds a pen and reads a name with a check mark. Shi Yi. Shi Yi instinctively raised his hand and said, "Here." Su Mingyue and other classmates all laughed. Su Mingyue chuckled and joked, "You don't need to raise your hands, just say, 'Here.'" Song Siu. 2. Xiao Wenning. 2. Wang Yiluan. 2. Everyone has arrived, and at the end of the sentence, there is only one last name left. Shen Dang. Shen Dang. Wang Yiluan put down his hand eating potato chips and looked around. Didn't Shen Dang come? What kind of mentality is it to pay but not come? I guess you don't want to stay with us people. They said they don't interfere with each other. Everyone muttered to themselves, and Xiao Wenning sat behind Shi Yi, asking Shi Yi outside of the situation. Shi Yi, do you know why Shen Dang didn't come? Shi Yi shook his head and said, I've only talked to him a few times, but I'm not very familiar with him. Not very familiar. Can you pay him for the autumn outing? Shi Yi looked at Xiao Wenning in surprise and said, how do you know? Xiao Wenning was taken aback for a moment, then his eyes flickered and he stuttered without speaking. And Shi Yi looked at her curiously. I only gave the money to Su Mingyue last night, and I said I handed it over on behalf of Shen Dang. How did you know? Xiao Wenning couldn't answer, probably feeling guilty and blushing with suppressed emotions. Until Shen Dang walked up from the car door in front of Shi Yi. The car was instantly quiet to a strange level. Shi Yi was still staring at Xiao Wenning and saw her staring straight ahead without saying anything. He asked, you haven't told me yet, how did you know? Shi Yi, Xiao Wenning pointed to the front, take a look. Shi Yi frowned and said, what are you looking at? Shen Dang's hair. Shi Yi turned around and, like everyone else, fell silent. Shen Dang still wore the same clothes as usual, a charging suit, and white sneakers. Just that rebellious red hair turned black. He was already good looking, without hair colors that were not appreciated by the secular world. He was simply so beautiful that it was hard to take his eyes off. I think our school grass can also be replaced. I think it's better to use commercial language. I've been reading Shang Ying for a year now. He's completely a deity who doesn't eat worldly pleasures. It's quite boring to watch for a long time. What about Shen Dang? Shen Dang looks very secular. Su Mingyue, wearing a little bee, joined the conversation with her classmates in the front row. Her microphone was loud, and after finishing a sentence, Shen Dang glanced at her. It is the merciless gaze of autumn wind sweeping away fallen leaves. Someone gave Su Mingyue a thumbs up and said, bully. Respect. Su Mingyue, you are my god. Su Mingyue chuckled and casually placed a hook next to Shen Dang's name, saying to the driver, Master, we can set off now. Shen Dang sat next to Shi Yi. Xiao Wenning in the back seat secretly looked at Shen Dang, his eyes also a bit dazed. However, Shi Yi didn't care about Shen Dang's expressionless expression and took the initiative to say hello, I thought you weren't coming. Little princess, you have already paid, of course I will come. Money is not easy to earn, Shen Dang said lazily. Shi Yi was taken aback by him and said, what are you calling me? Shen Dang's face was also a bit uncomfortable. Usually, Wei Xingliang shouted too much from the little princess beside him, which made him unable to change his mind for a while. He just blurted it out. Shi Yi felt embarrassed and whispered, don't call me that in the future. Shen Dang sneered lightly and pointed to her earphones, what are you listening to? Shi Yi said, I really like you. Shen Dang. Shi Yi really wanted to bite off her tongue and stuttered as she added, this is a song, it's called I Super Like You. Shen Dang took a pair of headphones over and Shi Yi was taken aback. He wanted to retrieve them and said, what are you doing with my things? Give them back to me. Class monitor, Shen Dang raised his eyebrows and said seriously, I have been growing vegetables in the countryside since I was young and have never used a Walkman. Can you feel the sound quality? Before Shi Yi could say whether it was okay or not, Shen Dang had already listened to it on his own, and his singing gradually became clear. Even if the world is against me, I love you so much. No taboos, no enemies, I love you so much. Shen Dang frowned and stuffed the earphones back into Shi Yi's ear. disdainfully saying, "That's all you love listening to." "I think it sounds pretty good," Shi Yi said in a formal tone. The car arrived at its destination with a swaying motion, and everyone cheered down, with Shi Yi and Shen Dang at the back. When going down the stairs, Shi Yi's legs felt a bit numb from sitting for too long, and Shen Dang helped her. Shi Yi seemed to be electrocuted, without hesitation for a second, and quickly pulled his hand back. "Even on flat ground, you can fall." Shen Dang glanced at his empty palm and withdrew his gaze. With a tsk, he commented, "It's useless." End of this chapter.